Please be ready for a dictation of a debate from the Parliament. 5 seconds. Start. Sir, with your permission, I beg to move that the bill further to amend the Central Educational Institutions Reservation in Admission Act 2006 as passed by Rajya Sabha be taken into consideration. Sir, the Central Educational Institutions Reservation in Admission Act 2006 was enacted by Parliament to provide reservation in admission of students belonging to the scheduled castes, the scheduled tribes, and other backward classes to certain central educational institutions established, maintained, or aided by the central government. Sir, you might remember that when the original Act was passed under Section 6 of the said Act, the central educational institutions were required to give effect to the provisions of that Act from the academic session 2007-8. But there were some proceedings in the Supreme Court of India where the Supreme Court stipulated that the implementation of the provisions of that Act for the purposes of reservation of OBCs and also expanding their capacity will start from the next academic session. So, accordingly, we need to amend the provisions of this Act so that the commencement for the purposes of implementation starts from the year 2008-9. Sir, as you know, in any legislation, when it is enacted and implemented, certain problems arise in the course of implementation, and these were brought to the notice of the central government. The reasons for this are historical because the distinguished honorable members of this House know that in some parts in Northeast there are no scheduled castes. There are only scheduled tribes. In some states, the reservation is for the scheduled tribes historically, and the states have been following that policy over a period of several years. In some states, there are no other backward classes. So, when we realized that in many states, historically, reservation has been implemented with respect to the population of that state, we felt that we need to protect that reservation. This is one of the difficulties that arose. In the Act, as you know, reservation for the scheduled castes is 15%, and for the scheduled tribes it is 7%. But in several of the states, the reservations are beyond that limit, and those need to be protected. Then another major issue arose with respect to Section 4 of the said Act, because Section 4 stipulated that the tribal areas referred to in the 6th schedule of the Constitution were no longer to be governed by the reservation policy for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. This also created an anomaly because if they were no longer to be governed by this, then how would reservation be put in place and implemented? This certainly was not the intent of Parliament, that the reservation already in place in those areas should be done away with because of Section 4. That was not the intent. So this also had to be dealt with. Sir, as you know, in the Northeast, we have NITs in almost all the states, and there we have the All India quota and the state seats. The All India quota is filled through a process of examination on the basis of All India merit, but the state seats are set aside for the state students. Many times the reservation is beyond 50% and there is no scope for OBCs. So we wanted to make sure that reservation is kept intact. That is another issue that came up. Then, with reference to Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar University in Uttar Pradesh, it was established, as you know, much prior to the coming into force of this act, and there the reservation for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes itself is 50%. So then it was not possible for us to give any reservation to the OBCs there. Now, because of historical reasons, those anomalies had to be corrected. So the essence of this amendment is to correct those anomalies, to preserve the reservation in states where reservations have been given much beyond the stipulated percentage in terms of the Constitution. This reservation must be protected in those institutions which have been set up prior to the coming into force of this act, where reservations are granted to a particular category. This, of course, applies to very few institutions. In rest of the institutions, all the policies required under the Act have been implemented. The other issue that came up for consideration was that in some institutions, medical colleges had to be expanded, and because medical colleges had to be expanded, that could not be done in the course of 3 years. You know, when you give admissions to students in medical colleges, you need hospital facility. So, in some of these central universities where medical facilities have had to be given and colleges had to be expanded and hospitals had to be provided for, obviously the 3-year period was not enough. Stop.